Today we're going to be talking about the most controversial early access game on Steam. And I'm not talking about scam games such as The Day Before, I'm talking about another kind of a survival horror game. It is a game that got cancelled back in 2010, but it got rebooted in 2017. It is one of the most anticipated tactical shooters in the past, I'm going to say 20 years. And it just hit early access earlier this year. The game that I'm talking about is none other than 6 Days in Fallujah.
Welcome to Madden Center Rooftop Shop of LRB Loader. They've got us 18 fire in seconds. You can clear that out first.
Hey, there's a couple of guys on the roof. Roof. Shit! I got two. Outside. Got him. Nope. Upstairs. I got him. Oh, behind us. I got him. Holy shit, there's a lot of them coming in from the west side. Shit! Where is he? I can't see shit, dude. I got him. That's our cue, we gotta go!
Oh, we got him.
Holy shit! V-Bad coming in, north side. Got him. Sit the fuck down. Hey, there's a guy inside. Behind. Got him. Two more down.
What's that, martyrs? Gotta move.
Oh shit. Yeah, let's leg it.
Oh, the martyr got me.
6 Days in Fallujah was supposed to be released in 2010, but it was way too controversial for the time. So it got pushed back, and in the end it got cancelled, just for it to get rebooted again in 2017. Originally there were supposed to be 2 campaigns. Both of them were supposed to be set in the second battle of Fallujah, with the first campaign following the USMC's 3rd Battalion as they fight the Iraqi insurgency in Fallujah, and the second one was supposed to follow a civilian family that is trying to flee the city. That was, at least, the idea of the original developers of the game back in the late 2000s. From what I know, there is no mention of the second campaign even being a thing, since Highwire Games bought the rights to this game from Atomic Games. Which honestly might be for the best, but we will talk about politics, because we have to talk about the politics in this game in just a bit. Let's talk about the game itself first. The game is really good, even though it seems to be still in the alpha stage of the development, which is to be expected from an early access game. But in 10 hours that I have played this game, I have encountered a single game-breaking bug. Or, to be completely honest, I myself did not experience it. I had a guy in my fire team that experienced a bug where he was not able to interact with his weapon. So even though it's an early access game, it seems pretty stable and it's working as intended for the most part. With that said, there are currently only 3 missions that you can play. You can defend a convoy, search for and destroy a weapons cache, or attack and hold a terrorist HQ. But even though there are only 3 missions, the replayability is huge since the maps are procedurally generated. So they're gonna feel different every time you start a mission. So basically how this works is that the developers have built assets such as houses, town squares, and destroyed buildings, and each time you start a mission, you get a different layout of the map. 2 years ago, the devs have said that the layout of the building interiors are also going to be procedurally generated, but I'm honestly not sure about that, because I started noticing the same houses and interiors after just a couple of hours of playtime, which is honestly not that bad of a thing, but I would surely love if the interior layout of the buildings was different every time I entered them. The reason why they did this is not to cut corners with the level design, but to make you experience at least a bit of what the Marines have been experiencing while clearing the buildings and attacking enemy strongholds. Because they would never know what to expect when they enter the building, and they would go into a neighborhood blind without knowing the layout of the streets or the building interiors. And honestly, I think that it's just a great idea and it's so revolutionary, and it just makes the gameplay experience amazing. The gunplay is solid and pretty realistic, although sometimes it can be clunky, especially when you're getting shot at and your character flinches and drops his weapon, or if you're close to a wall and then the game simply can't figure out what to do with your gun. It can be frustrating, but it doesn't take much to adapt to those game mechanics and to work around those issues. And I get it, it's an early access game, but this is the time when we need to talk about those issues so the developers know so they can fix them, right? Speaking of guns, you can't choose classes and you never know what you'll get. Unless you're a squad leader, then you always get an M4 with a grenade launcher and an ACOG. It's a roll of dice, and if you're the machine gunner, the only flashlight you will have is attached to your sidearm. So even though you're OP outside, you will need to curb your enthusiasm when you get indoors. Not knowing where you're going or what to expect behind a closed door is an amazing experience for sure, but the feeling of being in a real gunfight on a battlefield gets even more immersive with the time of day and weather effects, or when you enter a building. The game basically turns into a survival horror game, since your flashlight isn't that powerful and doesn't light up the whole place. Maybe at some point the game will have ray tracing so the light could bounce off the walls a bit more, and I'm sure it will all feel a bit more realistic. Even though I understand that this is a conscious design choice by the game devs, I would still love to see some light spilling around the room. Not only that it would make the game look better, but it could also add to the immersion even more. And the reason why I believe that this is a design choice by the devs is that once a grenade goes off, it kicks up so much dust that it's almost impossible to see inside the buildings. So basically, not only that they want the game to feel realistic, the developers also want you to feel completely lost and scared for your life. Speaking of which, depending on where you get hit, you can either get one shot and die, or you can get injured, and if you're quick enough, you can bandage yourself. But if you're not quick enough, your teammates have a couple of seconds to get you up. And if you die, you need to wait for reinforcements, and you only get one set of them per game. Also, you can only call for reinforcements from the APC that is almost always gonna be still at the original spawn. So basically, the best thing to do is to wait for most of your team to die before you call the reinforcements in. There's no point in wasting it on a single person. So you can see that the game really wants you to stick to your fire team, to communicate at all times, and to take it slow, because slow is smooth and smooth is fast, or something like that. So I talked about the good, but since it's a game that is in active development, we need to talk about the bad things. So I already talked about the clunky movement and gun mechanics, but I guess that those things will be fleshed out in the near future. But the main issue with this game is that the AI is basically brain dead, and they will run at a convoy with 2 APCs and a whole fire team shooting at them. Granted, if the AI is better, this game will be so hard that most people wouldn't even give it a chance. But there needs to be a middle ground where the AI isn't as brain dead, where it would actively try to get to cover or try to flank you without it being completely OP. While the character models look good, the animations leave a lot to be desired, especially when you look at the enemy NPCs. Their movement is not fluid at all, and I'm pretty sure that investing into a couple of sessions in a good mocap studio would go a long way for this game. Shadows tend to glitch out, and I'm hoping that this will get resolved soon, not only because it breaks the immersion and makes the game look ugly, but they tend to draw your attention to them while you're trying to actively scan for enemies. The one ACOG scope that you can have as a squad leader is a nice addition, but it just looks terrible. The zooming in is done by literally zooming into whatever you're seeing on your screen. So even if you're playing at 4K resolutions, the pixels will be apparent and will make you feel like you're playing an indie game. Hopefully, this is just a placeholder, but if it was up to me, I wouldn't even release the game with this kind of a scope in it. Now, the biggest flaw of the current state of the game is that even though it's really fun how the maps change every time, it's always a small square block that you can run around in 2 minutes. So what I'm saying is that the maps are just too small to my liking. Yes, you can enter every building, and yes, you can get shot from every window and hole in a wall, but most of the games you'll play are going to last up to 15-minute stops, and for me that is just too short. I would really like to see bigger maps with open areas such as intersections that you need to cross, or you can find different routes that you can take, or just find a way to go around that intersection, because that's something something I would expect from a tactical shooter like this. But if you get killed at the start, that means that you will be waiting for a long time until your teammates respawn you or until the match ends. And that's just a bad mechanic, especially if you're playing with strangers, because they will leave once they get killed, since it's faster to find a new game than to wait for the game to end. So what happened a couple of times was that the game host got killed and he left the game, which ended up in the server closing. Or at least that's how it looked like, because I still don't know if the games are hosted on private servers or on public servers. And the last but not the least issue of the game is hot miking. The game has your mic enabled at all times, which is understandable for this type of a game. But even though you can mute your microphone whenever you want to, the people with the worst fucking microphones never fucking seem to do that. So you can always hear rumble, static, and just noise coming out of them. Granted, it only happens in local VoIP, but it is a thing that is really easy to solve. The developers can just give us two keybinds, one for radio chat and the other for local VoIP. And I would also love to see some PvP in this game. I believe that it's really easy to implement. Just add players to the other side and mix them up with the NPCs. I believe that this would make the experience even better, even though I basically just heard that they will never do that. But all in all, I'm really excited to see what will happen with this game, as I'm a huge fan of tactical shooters and I have invested over 1,000 hours into Squad, Hell Let Loose and games like that, and almost a decade of my life into Project Reality. Now, let's talk about something that I didn't really see any YouTubers address before, and yes, it's the politics. The game starts with a documentary-style intro with the narrator and the actual Marines talking about all of the atrocities that happened in Fallujah, and they show some of the actual footage that we saw in the news back in the early 2000s, and it really makes me sick. It's not because they showed the explicit footage of public executions, they didn't, but it's because they show the final moments of some people's lives. And it's not that I'm getting too old, but the intro is just disturbing for a bunch of different reasons. First being the footage that they used and how realistic they wanted the whole thing to be. But it's a fucking game, guys. Couldn't you like animate it? Couldn't you hire some actors to like reenact the thing? Like why is this a thing? But the second reason is that it seems like whoever wrote the script for the intro intentionally left out a ton of things, or they just skipped the whole reason why the war started, making the US and the Marine Corps the only light in a world of darkness. And look, I'm not trying to be overly political here, but I can't ignore the propaganda and the politics that are being pushed by this game. I have no idea if it was a conscious decision or not, but it really left a sour taste in my mouth. Now, being a Serb that still resides here in Serbia, I can tell you that US has bombed my country and a lot of innocent lives were lost. But I still don't have any issues flying FA-18s or F-16s in DCS. Nor would I have an issue of playing an FPS game that is set in my hometown, for that matter. As a matter of fact, every time I play Squad and we get the Narva map, I always tell the other players how much the map looks like a typical Slavic town and how much it reminds me of certain places in my hometown. And I wouldn't have an issue with a game or a movie that depicts the Yugoslav civil war in a true way, but all the awful shit that the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosnians did, but do it right for fuck's sake, so people would know that we were neighbors and friends and that some of us got turned against each other by warmongering politicians that profited from the whole thing. Now back to 6 days in Fallujah. It's not just about the war being justified or not, it's the fact that there are always at least two sides to the same story, and if you ignore one while you glorify the other, I personally have a huge problem with that. But since this game has a documentary style of storytelling in the intro, I would expect to have at least some kind of a moral dilemma in it, at least from the fucking narrator, especially if it's a known fact that the US went to war with Iraq because of WMDs that were never found because they never fucking existed.
Mr. Bush, when are you going to apologize for the million Iraqis that are dead because you lied? You lied about weapons of mass destruction. You lied about connections to 9/11. You lied about Iraq being a threat. You sent me to Iraq. You sent me to Iraq in 2003. My friends are dead.
And that Al-Qaeda entered Iraq after the invasion, and that this little war took the lives of 122,000 civilians, of which 14,000 were signed off as collateral damage done by the coalition forces. But for you guys that are American and that are watching, I'm not saying that the US is bad and that terrorism is good. Of course not. I'm not saying that your boys are not as tough as nails or as like brave as lions are. But if you do a controversial fucking story, do it fucking right. If the game is covering real life events and conflicts, it's really hard not to make your game look like blatant propaganda by telling just one side of the story, especially if you take into consideration how many innocent lives were taken or destroyed by this whole piece of shit war. A war that resolved nothing and ended nothing. Do I really need to tell you that there are still suicide bombings and terrorist attacks in Iraq? Those people are living worse now. So what the fuck was the purpose of the fucking war? And you can say that this game just focuses on a single conflict, and it's not there to give you a history lesson. But you need to realize that not talking about certain things can say a lot about you, your game, or your product. And this is not an SJW rant, this is me pointing out that if you want to be controversial, you need to either do it right or face a lot of fucking criticism. And that is why I would either like to see the civilian campaign that was originally planned for the game, or for Highway Games to modify their narrative and for them to show more of the footage from those Marines that were involved with the conflict, so we can see and hear what they were really thinking when they realized that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that in the end they were as indoctrinated as the people they were fighting against, or simply acknowledge the fact that Iraq under Saddam's regime was the favorite ally of the United States until he wasn't, and that the people of Iraq were safer and much wealthier before any American intervention. And I'm not talking about the invasion itself here, I'm talking about the 12-year sanctions that broke the people. So the whole thing basically broke the whole population, because before they used to have a single tyrant to be afraid of, now they have hundreds of them. They used to keep their mouth shut and be safe, now they get killed because they believe in the wrong gods, or were born in the wrong places, or just have names that are just not allowed. So listen, what I'm saying here is real life politics are really complicated, and it's really hard and difficult to explain them. So that is why it should be completely avoided in game development. The story could have been told carefully and tastefully like HBO and Tom Hanks did with the Band of Brothers, but it's still hard to do because the war in Iraq was nothing like the Second World War, since there is not a clear line between the good and the evil. So I would honestly like to see the developers telling the whole story here, and if they don't, I can write this game off as propaganda, or better yet, as yet another recruitment game for the US military. Anyway, I'll be keeping my eye out on this game because it looks very promising, but if they don't change the story, the only people that will be playing this game will be the people that either don't know or don't care about what happened there. And I believe that all of us should know and should care so it doesn't happen again. Anyway, thank you for watching, and thank you to my patrons that are supporting me through these harsh times, because I'm like covering a bunch of different games. I used to be a different kind of a YouTuber, but now I'm this, I guess. So thank you. If you want to become a patron, if you like my honest opinions, there's a link down below. You can also become a channel member. You know how YouTube works and all of that. But thank you from the heart, and yeah, that's it. Bye. Love you. Is this Iraq or Mexico? I'm not sure, like, what are we looking at?
That's the tunnel from Mexico that's underground the KFC.